Hey everybody, welcome to Workforce Gaming. I'm Brad, here with Doug.
Hey.
Scorn is a horror puzzle game that's
Mhm.
just kind of has a weird look to it. That weird mutilated bodies, everything looking gooey type thing is kind of the look I get from it.
Yeah,
I
no,
just
that's close
yeah.
enough. That's definitely correct.
Every time I look at it, it's like I don't. It just looks dark and everything looks sticky.
It is. It is a very dark, sticky, disgusting. Will show you images that are very unsettling and will definitely stick with you after you've played the game for sure. But also probably the best looking game I've played. It's up there. It's up there. It's like one of the
Best
most
looking in terms
striking.
of like okay, like most striking, like art style or like graphics, like just
Both,
impressive.
both. It's like
All the above.
triple. Yeah, it's like triple A modern graphics with a really striking art style. So it's just a very striking game. Yeah.
Interesting, because it's from like a really small team, right? It's an indie. I think it's like an indie developer, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely an indie developer. Shoot, I can't remember their name. I don't know if this is their first game. It was a game that I think has just been in development forever. I mean, I think it's
Yeah,
been just like 5 years. So if you just have a small team working 5-6 years on this thing, that's like a 5 hour game, and they just you know look over every inch of detail on this thing. It's gonna look like something like this. Yeah.
so what exactly is it? Because I think the look has everybody in it, and then I think the weird history of this is that I feel like everybody who knows Easy Allies knows this game from Easy Allies because that's the only reason. Like, and then it randomly popped up on Xbox Game Pass is like the only history I have for this game. So what exactly is it? Like, you told me it's a puzzle game. It's got this weird art style thing going for it. So what exactly is this?
Yeah. I think what is this game? I think the better way to think about this game, because when I saw the reviews that came out, there's like a lot of like really low reviews, like 6 out of 10s, some 5 out of 10s, like some like optimistic 7 out of 10s, and that sort of thing. So I like kind of went in with like, all right, this game's just gonna suck. And I I think there's a lot of things to complain about, but I think that if you kind of meet the game on its own terms, because there's games that come out that are like, what is gaming? I think Journey was kind of like those big first ones, but now if you
Yeah.
look back on Journey, it's like, yeah, of course that was a video game. Like, no question. Like, I don't know why it's funny even now, even looking back, that was even a discussion. But there was a more recent game called Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, which was
Great game.
yeah, great game. The very slow game that was more like you're walking from point to point and listening to a really good radio play.
Yep.
That game also similarly got like kind of like lower scores because if you just compare it to a traditional game, it's like not a great game, but it's a really great experience. And I kind of feel like that's kind of where Scorn falls into that bucket. Like if you kind of walk in the game going like, oh, I want a survival horror game with like really great puzzles and everything, like you're not gonna get that. But what you're going to get is probably one of the most like laser focused tone piece art. It reminds me a lot of like art exhibit type games that I've played like a few times. I try to think of like there's not that many examples off the top of my head. We're just kind of like walking through an environment that is
That
just like
Radiohead thing.
yes, I think that's probably the closest thing that I would compare it to
Okay.
because it's just this. It's like it just feels like it's like almost like an atmospheric piece that is just told through the medium of video games. Um, I'm not sure if we said it yet, but it's very inspired by the works of H.R. Geiger, who was a painter in the 1960s. He did these. He also he's most famously known for designing the Alien and Aliens, but he is also well known for designing really hyper sexualized metal, disgusting sort of paintings that are like really intense, very striking paintings. And this game, I think more so when you think of like games like, oh, this game was inspired by this artist. This game was,
Hmm.
inspired by this. This game, I feel like they looked at H.R. Geiger's paintings and like what would happen there. Like let's make this not just a this is like an interesting snapshot. It's like okay, what would actually happen in that world of an H.R.
Oh,
Geiger
okay.
painting? So I mean, it doesn't explicitly ever say H.R. Geiger, but that's kind of what it is. But the idea of the things that would happen in that world is that there's nothing good that can happen there. It's only horrible things. The people doing things and those things are probably not good. So you play a character who is essentially going through and let's just say an abandoned sort of mechanical city and the character you're playing as is doing things that you don't understand. You don't know the motive of this character, and you're just kind of along for the ride of trying to figure out what's going on. And in the game, how the game works mechanically is like there's just puzzles, and then there's some combat elements that are not good. They're just straight up not good. I don't want to complain too much about the game because I think the complaining is actually the boring part of it, because there's a lot to complain about. It's like the survival horror stuff is not good. It's because it's just dumb game stuff. It's like the shooting is bad. The action in the game is bad. It's like, okay, great. So what? It's like there's a lot of plenty of games with bad action.
So the gameplay's bad. But the game is fun. Is what?
Well, it's kind of like I don't know. Maybe I don't know if you do this, but there's like certain movies that like you'll watch, like say like some like really intense European horror movie, and you're just kind of like, holy shit! Like you kind of like you're like, I am now changed from this moment forward. Was that a good movie? I have no fucking idea, but like I just something inside me has changed, and that's kind of what it feels like playing this. It's like, is it a good game? It's like no. Moving on, next question, because everything else about it is super cool.
Okay, so
yeah.
so you're enjoying this in spite of the poor gameplay and just feeling of all the like gaminess of it. Because again,
Yeah.
I guess the kind of what I'm taking out of this is experience of this game is an interesting thing to experience, but it's not a good video game.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about how this is a good experience.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And so like when you see a 6 out of if I see a 6 out of 10 review, I'm like, I'm probably not even reading the review. I'm just like, I just don't have time to play not so great games anymore. It sounds really smug. It's just, there's just not a lot of time to play 6 out of 10 games. So I was like, throw it in the bucket. I was like, whatever. So I was seeing this one, I was getting reviews, and I was like, okay, well, I was just interested anyway. I was like, I threw it in the bucket in my head. I was like, but I did kind of want to see what it was, and like, let me just play a little bit.
And it's on Game Pass, so
Yeah, no, exactly. So mechanically, it's a 6 out of 10. Like the puzzles are not great. It is neat that it's like one big seamless world you're going through, and the puzzles are kind of like integrated into it. But because the game is telling you nothing at all times, it's really easy to get lost in the environment. It's really hard to figure out some of these puzzles because there's like no hints to the puzzles, and not even like hints. Like you're trying to even figure out how the puzzle works. Like you're not even sure what the goal of the puzzle is. So they have like a bunch of different puzzles, and you can't, and when you come upon one for the first time, you don't know what it is like mechanically or even what your goal is. If you think of like most puzzle games, like start here, end here, figure out how to do in between. You just are given this weird, disgusting mechanical thing that your character is like sliding his hand into and flipping levers, and all these like kind of weird things are twisting around. You're like trying to figure out like, what is this thing even trying to tell me, like besides my goal. I think that kind of applies to the whole game. It's like you don't know what your goal is. You don't know. Like I said, you don't know who you are. You don't. The game just tells you nothing. And if you're kind of okay with just like, okay, I'm just gonna kind of try and go along for the ride, and I think you're. Are you gonna have a good time? Maybe not, but I just think with the striking visuals, I think especially some of the scripted sequences, like you're just going to think about like long after they're done.
Interesting.
Yeah, but I guess if we're trying to think like what game does it play, like it plays kind of like Myst. It's like Myst if he had some bad shooting in it. I guess is the best way to put it.
Fun.
Yeah.
So other than like the striking images, like where is this experience? Like what's really drawing you into this? Because you are weirdly positive for a game that I feel like there's not a lot of positive about.
I think it's because the striking visuals are part of it, but I think it's not just the striking visuals. I think it's the striking actions that your character is taking. There are things that occur to your character that are permanent, that kind of come unexpectedly. There's this thing that I like with shorter games is that the stakes are never quite clear with a shorter game. Because if you have, let's say you have Uncharted 4, it's a 20-hour game. Nathan Drake is going to make it through all 20 hours just fine. Scorn is a 5 to 6 hour game, and you just never quite know if your character is going to make it. And the thing that's kind of in the back of your head, it's like, do I want my character to make this? Is the thing that I'm doing a good thing? Because the game's first puzzle has you do like a pretty incredibly violent act. I would almost call it heinous. That sets the tone for the whole game. So like just like you just don't see that in like most video games where you're like, what am I doing? Pulling this lever, and you pull a lever, and then like, holy shit, this thing happens, and it's like, oh, my character intended for that to happen. So you're kind of along for this like this misguided adventure where you don't know you I you don't know if the character you're playing as is a good person. You don't know if this world is even capable of good things happening in it. So it's just this kind of like maybe just not disgust, but there's just something about like I just need to see what happens next in this world.
Yeah.
And it's just that kind of slow turning of the screw as like you keep going further and further and further into this thing.
That weird like, am I interested in this? Is this interesting? This is definitely interesting, and I don't know if I'm enjoying it, but I want to see more of it. That kind of feeling.
Yes, exactly. It's kind of like I'm gonna say classy. There's just like the type of horror movie I'm just gonna like A24, like classy horror movies, like Midsummer, or it's kind of like that where you're just like it's bored. It's like on this line of just complete trash or like high art. So it's kind of playing this like high wire act between like, you know, trashy disgustingness, but actually, well, the way that they're describing the story they're describing is actually this kind of interesting thing that's taking place. It's a game. Like I chat online with folks about like video games and stuff. And somebody described it as like a haunting game. And that's what it feels like. It's like the visuals, the setting, what you're doing is just haunting. And I think that the final chapter and like the final segment of the game is probably the most violent, most disturbing, and maybe one of the more profound endings to a game I've played. I would describe it. I would put this game kind of in the same bucket as like Hellraiser. And it was the ending. Like I just remember sitting with the ending and like all the frustrations. Cause like I did the thing I didn't describe. It's like I found this game really frustrating. Just play with a walkthrough. I'll just say that. Just play with a walkthrough. The end. Just play with the walkthrough. Whatever. There's no easy setting, but there should be. Play with the walkthrough. And I just remember like when the game was done, I just kind of sat with like this pit in my stomach of what had happened in the finale. And I really was like thinking, it's like, okay, what exactly happened in the finale? Was the violence that occurred in that finale justified within this like the scope of the game? Mm-hmm. And it was all done really beautifully. So it's this game that just like it just feels like an absolute gut punch. And that's why that's the thing. It's like, did you enjoy it? It's like, I don't know. It's like, did you like it? I'm like, oh, I don't know. Was it a good game? Well, no. Yeah.
Is there story pulling you through any of this, or is it just the visuals and that weird like? Because again, kind of you compare it to Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, which it was kind of that narrative pulling you through, and there wasn't much else. Is this more of just the like visuals, the feeling, the tone, kind of just pulling you forward, or is there some story hook with any of this?
Because there's no dialogue. But I think you just want to know what the character is doing because like you're passing through things that have just been abandoned for a really long time, and they show your character trying to get to wherever they're like before you get to the big mechanical city thing where the game takes place. They show your character basically like fighting for his life, crawling on his hands and knees through deserts, through like hundreds and hundreds of miles and all these horrible landscapes
weird.
And doing all this stuff just to get to this place to do whatever it is he needs to do, or she or whatever. Yeah, and I there's things I just like need to think about, like some of the actions they ask you to do in the game are they gross for the sake of being gross, or are they gross to leave an impression? And it feels like there are certain scenes, again, like I'm thinking back to the final chapter because it just stuck with me so hard. There are some scenes that just felt like completely trashy, just like, this is stupid, like what are we doing here, like, oh, we're just being gross for the sake of being gross. But then there's other scenes where it's like you're looking at this horrific image and trying to figure out like, okay, what is happening physically in the scene? Like just like at its face value, what's happening in the scene? Okay, now then thinking back, like what is this imagery trying to evoke? What is this imagery trying to?
Yeah.
It really feels like looking at like a painting, or like you're going to an art museum and you see a painting that's just like there's just something strange that it kind of just strikes you and you just stare at it for a long time and you're trying to figure out, you know, what am I seeing at first, and like what does this feel like to me? What does this mean to this person? What does this mean in this context of the story? So that's it. It actually feels like a challenging art piece, and I don't think it needed to be as challenging of an art piece as it is because the gameplay. I think what the idea of the gameplay was that I think they screwed up was they wanted every enemy to feel dangerous. In Silent Hill and Resident Evil games, the older ones, you couldn't really aim well. But that was okay because it was kind of like an auto aim anyway. But in a first person shooter, to simulate aiming bad, they just have guns that don't feel well, or they have like a really long reload and that kind of thing. So like just that immediate gameplay just feels bad. And I think that's what makes it more of a challenging art piece, because it could have just been an interesting challenging art piece on its own if the game actions weren't so prohibitive, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a game that's like going to stick with me, and there's parts that I like thinking back and actually going back to replaying. It was. I don't know. I guess if you're into something that's just totally out of left field, just something that you've never played before, I will say hard M rating. There was stuff in this that I was like, I have not seen in video. It's just in video game formats. I've seen it in like really weird indie movies that are like, that don't have ratings sort of stuff. So I would just like really keep that in mind as you're going through it, and like try and keep an open mind. I can see a lot of people just stopping because of gameplay frustration. There was points where I just turned it off for the night because the gameplay was bad and annoying and that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, it's a game that'll stick with me for a long time. So I guess that's good. I don't know.
That's worth something. That's worth something.
I think it is worth something though, because I've played a lot of very well playing games that I just totally forgot I even played.
There's dozens of them I'm staring at right now that I couldn't even tell you what. Couldn't tell you much more than what's on the box of that game, but I played 15 hours of it. And so
and I feel like
with you is at least something.
Yes, and I feel like nobody's gonna forget Scorn. And it's just a beautiful thing to go through. I don't know. It's just an interesting idea. It's just it's cool. And it's that idea of like walking through a painting, I think, is like kind of what they've done here. Like H.R. Geiger, like this is your opportunity to go through a painting, and guess what? It's pretty horrible. Yeah,
but interesting. So that's something.
But interesting. Yeah.
Horrible, interesting, bad game, interesting game.
Yeah,
kind of feels all over, which I feel like is kind of par for the course for a lot of these indie games like this. Well,
yeah.
We are Workforce Gaming. You can follow us on Twitter at Workforce Gaming. Subscribe to us wherever you're listening, and we will see you later.
Bye.